President Buhari reacts to cloning allegation, says this is real me, not Jibril from Sudan. Oil marketers give federal government 7 days to settle 800 billion naira subsidy debt. In international news, Qatar leaves OPEC next month to focus on its natural gas production. And in support, Presidency NFF received falcons in Abuja.
This is ANN News.
I am Olajumoke Olatunji. President Buhari is present in Poland attending the 24th session of the Conference of the Parties under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. The president also used the occasion to have an interactive session with the Nigerian community in the country, where he responded to a question from a Nigerian in the diaspora who wanted to know if it was real or the much talked about Jibril from Sudan, his supposed body double. President Buhari described the authors of the confusion about him as ignorant and irreligious.
The authors of that question must be ignorant and irreligious. Somebody thought that I am cloned. No wonder I forgot it until I was reminded by it. Yes, a lot of people hoped that I was dead. And hoped I died. And poor Vice President, I answered, some people have started, in fact, asking for his office, whether he should consider them for being the Vice President because I was dead. But it's really me, I assure you.
Oil marketers have once again given the federal government 7-day ultimatum on Sunday to settle outstanding debts totaling almost ₦1 trillion. They say if this is not done, depots would cease operation across the country. The marketers, comprising Major Oil Marketers Association of Nigeria, Depot and Petroleum Products Marketers Association, and Independent Petroleum Products Importers, said failure to meet the deadline would force its members to disengage workers from depots. Patrick Etim, legal advisor to IPPI, confirmed the banks have taken over investments and assets of oil marketers over unpaid debt. Etim says marketers have instructed their workers to stay at home. They say the only way out is for the government to pay the outstanding debt through a cash option instead of its proposed promissory notes. The federal government has withdrawn the recent threats to activate the no work, no pay policy against striking university teachers. Labour threatens to report the federal government to international labour organizations. National President of the Academic Staff Union of Universities, ASU, Professor Biodun Oguyemi, said what the union was doing was to rescue the education sector from imminent collapse and to ensure that the children of the poor get access to quality and affordable education. Oguyemi also said last Friday's meeting between the two parties did not yield much result. The Economic and Financial Crimes Commission has traced properties worth 500 million naira to former Plateau State Governor Jonah Jang. EFCC acting spokesman Tony Orilade says the properties are located in Kaduna State. Orilade said preliminary investigation has revealed that the properties were purchased from New Capital Properties Limited, a subsidiary of Northern Nigeria Development Company in Kaduna. Jang is standing trial on a 12-count charge of diversion of public funds. American Embassy in Abuja has denied issuing a visa to Atiku Abubakar, presidential candidate of the People's Democratic Party, has been reported or rumored over the weekend. The presidential candidate is reported to have been banned from the U.S. for 13 years now. A source confirmed that Atiku only traveled to the UK and is now back in the country. An aide to Atiku said he does not intend to travel to the United States anytime soon, even though Ogun State former Governor Benga Daniel, who is Director General of the Atiku Presidential Campaign Organization, had said Atiku had received signals from American officials that if he applied for American visa, it would be granted. The Nigerian Communications Commission says multiple taxation and duplicated regulation are threatening the nation's quest for achieving telecommunication infrastructure objectives. NCC Executive Commissioner Sunday Dare said this on Sunday in Benin at the South-South stakeholders meeting. Dare said Edo State government and the NCC had continued to work closely to explore opportunities for improving access to telecoms infrastructure and providing citizens of the state with world-class telecoms and ICT facilities. The Kwara State Police Command has arrested 13 persons for allegedly selling, hawking and trading in Naira notes, contrary to provisions in the Act of the Central Bank of Nigeria. The spokesman for the State Command, DSP Ajayi or Kasami, who paraded the suspects, said the arrests were necessary to enforce the provisions of Sections 20 and 21 of the CBN Act, which say selling and trading of the Naira currency are punishable offences. Al-Kasami said the suspects were arrested at various points in Ilorin metropolis following intelligence reports. The suspects will be charged at the conclusion of police investigation. Al-Kasami said members of the public should desist from abusing the Naira. He said our currency is one of the symbols of our identity. Coming up, African stories. Tanzania ranked third on list of highest wage inequality. And later, Qatar leaves OPEC next month to focus on natural gas production.
You are watching ANN.
This used to be me. But that was before I got the perfect bag. It's handy and easy to use. All I need in one compact space, just like my MTN Extra Value plan. I used to get one plan for my calls and then try to remember which data plan worked for me. Roaming was a totally different ballgame. Not anymore. I've got the MTN Extra Value all-in-one plan. If you're a data buff like me, you get extra data with some talk time. And if you like to make calls, you get extra talk time with some data. And when I'm abroad, I automatically browse, chat, and call right on the same plan. MTN Extra Value was made just for me.
More of data or calls, whichever one you prefer. MTN Extra Value is made just for you.
Welcome back. This is ANN News and African Stories. Tanzania has been ranked third among 64 surveyed countries in the world with the highest level of wage inequality after scoring high in Gini estimates. Gini measures the extent to which the distribution of income, or in some cases consumption expenditure, among individuals or households within an economy is unequally distributed. The Global Wage Report 2018-2019, published by the International Labour Organization, shows that Tanzania scored 53.5% Gini estimates of wage inequality, higher than the global average of 35.5%. Wages inequality in Tanzania has grown over the years. In 2011, the Gini was lower at just about 35%. Women are more affected in this inequality in Tanzania. They are paid 20% of what male employees are paid, but the country scored higher than average for low-income countries in a new study. The report shows that South Africa was on top of the list, followed by Namibia, among the 64 countries featured in the study. Global ratings agency Moodys reports that Kenyan banks have the unflattering honor of having the highest rate of bad loans in Africa. The agency says Kenya banks' non-performing loan are among the most elevated among major economies in Africa. The study also says this bad news may even get worse because of continued government delays in paying contractors and suppliers who owe lenders billions of shillings. Moodys says in a new report on African banks, the weak risk management practices in the past have also contributed to the problem among African banks, with many of those assets lying above 10%. Of 11 African countries profiled by Moodys in the report, only Angola, Ghana, Democratic Republic of Congo have a higher ratio than Kenya at about 25, 22 and 18% respectively. Zimbabwe's Cabinet Justice, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs Minister Ziyambi says he will soon receive a proposal on abolishing the death penalty in the country. Ziyambi told delegates at the 11th International Meeting of the Ministers of Justice in Rome on Sunday that the death sentence was not only cruel and degrading punishment, but also destroyed life. This development comes at a time when Zimbabwe has 81 prisoners on the death row, while 127 are striving life terms. Ziyambi also said Zimbabwe's 2013 constitution had pointed the country in this direction on the question of death penalty. He said the constitution provides for the death penalty if a person were convicted of murder committed in aggravating circumstances. He made distinctions that the constitution stipulates the death sentence must not be imposed on women, male persons under 21 years of age, and more than 70 years old if convicted of murder committed in aggravating circumstances. The minister also said researches in criminology have shown that the death penalty does not serve as a deterrent but compounds the commission of crimes. A new group of drug buyers is looking to help in fighting the HIV crisis in Africa. The club wants to provide access to cheap generic drugs. A drug buyer club like this operated in the 1980s when AIDS treatments were new and those who suffered from the disease had no choice but to die. Treatment rates have risen dramatically since then, but close to 2 million persons became infected with HIV in 2017. The United Nations has warned high infection rates threatening to derail efforts to defeat the disease. Pre-exposure prophylaxis is a groundbreaking delay pill that can prevent infection, but for many at risk, the cost puts it out of reach, leading to a re-emergence of the buyers club. They don't sell drugs, but they provide details of trusted online pharmacies and manufacturers based in different countries who sell generic drugs at cheap, affordable prices to those suffering from the disease. The process is legal in many countries, and several small-scale trials have found no evidence of fake drugs among the generics. This would have been a sweet, aromatic chocolate story, except that the industry has now been tainted by abusers, especially those detailed against Brazilian cocoa farms where thousands of instances of child labor had been identified. A report released jointly on Friday by the Brazilian Federal Labor Prosecution Office and the International Labour Organization says cocoa from Brazilian farms where human rights violations are common is used in the global chocolate supply chain. Among the abusers detailed are farmers forced to work out debts to landowners or in degrading conditions, as well as thousands of instances of child labor. The report is based on findings from a year-long field investigation and a series of interviews with authorities and rural workers in the states of Bahia and Pará. Brazil was the world's 7th largest cocoa producer last year. It exports processed cocoa products to the United States, Argentina, the Netherlands, Mexico, Chile, and Uruguay. When we return, international news, Qatar leaves OPEC next month to focus on its natural gas production. And later sport, Presidency NFF received Falcons in Abuja.
You are watching ANN.
Are you sure you want to do this?
Adam, go and bring us your husband. Okay, hello baby.
We're in this together, okay? Can you hear me? Keep coming forward.
Wait, stop.
You okay, lean to your right. Keep walking down. Keep walking to the left. Yes.
You're almost here.
Keep going.
You are here. Wow, you did it.
I'm so glad I didn't have to use my cane to do this.
And I am so glad no other man got you before me. Let me be your eyes.
We will never stop working to give you a network you can rely on so you can enjoy life's special moments. MTN, everywhere you go.
We are on the road every day, canvassing throughout Africa for news you really need. We follow this story everywhere, from every corner of Nigeria to the wide African expanse. We bring you what's making headlines. We connect you with news you can use. ANN, African News Network, in a truly African spirit.
Shining our eyes on breaking news, whether in the east or in the west, with Al-Shabaab in Somalia and Boko Haram in Nigeria, with turbulence in the north and agitation in the south. Wherever you live in Nigeria, wherever news happens in Africa, we've got it covered. ANN News, connecting Africans in a truly African spirit.
Welcome back. This is ANN News. Now to news from around the world. Qatar is pulling out of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, in January after 60 years as a member. The country's energy minister said at a news conference the decision to quit the cartel was communicated to OPEC on Monday. In June last year, a political and economic boycott of Qatar was imposed by Arab states of Saudi Arabia, Bahrain and Egypt over allegations that support terrorism. Doha has denied the charges and says its exit from OPEC is not related to the actions by the three Arab states. Qatar is the world's largest exporter of liquefied natural gas, even though it is one of the cartel's smallest oil producers. Al-Kabi says his country has denied, or rather had studied how it could enhance its role internationally and had decided to increase its liquefied natural gas production from 77 million to 110 million tons per year. Qatar would still attend the OPEC meeting in Vienna that starts on Thursday and will set oil policies for next year. One analyst says this is not good news for the oil market. He also says it wouldn't be surprising if more countries follow suit. Qatar pumps 600,000 barrels per day, while Saudi Arabia pumps 11 million. U.S. President Donald Trump said at the G20 summit over the weekend that China and the U.S. have agreed to a temporary trade war truce. He said Beijing will reduce and remove the 40% tariffs it places on U.S. cars imported into China. He has confirmed this would be welcome news to the U.S. auto industry that has been negatively affected by the deepening U.S.-China trade war. Trump said he and President Xi agreed to the truce over dinner at the G20 summit. We have agreed to not increase tariffs for 90 days while they discuss issues related to their disputes. If this truce had not been struck, tariffs would have risen from 10 to 25% on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods in January. China has not commented on President Trump's Twitter announcement of this truce. 130 yellow vest demonstrators were injured in Paris on Sunday in the latest round of violent protests against rising gas taxes and the high cost of living. More than 400 of the 5,000 demonstrators were also arrested. Rioters tore apart parts of the city, touching cars, smashing windows, looting stores and tagging the Arc de Triomphe with multicolored graffiti. Police fired tear gas and water cannons as some demonstrators launched projectors over police lines. Officials said those hurt when the demonstrations turned violent, including 23 police officers. At one point, a group of protesters encircled the tomb of the unknown soldier located on the Arc de Triomphe and sang the French national anthem before being dispersed by police. Officials were cleaning the streets Sunday and removing graffiti from the Arc. The demonstrations kicked off in mid-November, and for more than 2 weeks, motorists have blocked highways across the country by setting up barricades and deploying convoys of slow-moving trucks. The Yellow Jackets activist wants President Emmanuel Macron to call off the tax increases. Some have called on him to also resign. After long civil tensions between Ukraine and Russia escalated into a clash in the Black Sea last week, Russian men between the ages of 16 and 60 have been banned from entering Ukraine. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko tweeted on Twitter that restrictions on Russian nationals were taken in order to prevent the formation of what he called private armies, whom he says are representatives of Russian armed forces. Russian Foreign Ministry said on Friday Moscow would not reciprocate and impose similar restrictions on Ukrainian men. Russian ships opened fire on 3 Ukrainian and seized them along with 24 crew members in the Sea of Azov off the coast of Crimea last week. Ukraine says the attack occurred in international waters. Fearing there could be a Russian invasion, Poroshenko introduced martial law on Tuesday for up 30 days in parts of the country deemed most vulnerable to a potential attack. Israeli police says it has enough evidence to indict Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on bribery charges. This adds to the Prime Minister's mountain of troubles that have dogged him for a long time and makes running for re-election next year a tall order. Netanyahu denied the latest allegations, but his fate now lies in the hands of Attorney General, who will decide in the coming months whether the Prime Minister should stand trial on a host of corruption allegations that could play a central role in next year's election campaign. Netanyahu, who has never been timid in responding to allegations, called the investigation a witch hunt. He says it was tainted from the start. Sunday's decision followed a lengthy investigation into a case involving Netanyahu's relationship with Saul Elovich, the controlling shareholder of Israel telecoms giant Beckett. Police said in a statement that their investigations showed that Netanyahu was engaged in a bribe-based relationship with Elovich. Netanyahu's wife, Sarah, is also joined in the charges of accepting bribes, fraud and breach of trust. Police have already recommended indicting Netanyahu on corruption charges in 2 other cases. The Prime Minister has denied any wrongdoing. George Herbert Walker Bush, America's 41st president, has died at the age of 94, the first American president to reach that age. During Bush's one term as U.S. president, he reasserted the U.S. as the world's lone superpower and rallied an international coalition against Iraq's Saddam Hussein in the First Gulf War. He also presided over the fall of the Berlin Wall and subsequent collapse of the Soviet Union. The announcement of his passing was made in a statement by his son, former U.S. President George W. Bush, grandson George P., said on Twitter. Friday night, quote, "He was more than a great man. He was a good man. His courage was matched by his compassion, and his dedication to country was equaled only by his devotion to his family." Bush 41 was one of the most experienced public servants in U.S. history. He served 2 terms as vice president under Ronald Reagan before becoming president in 1989. His career in public service had also included stints as director of the CIA and U.S. ambassador to China and the UN in the 1970s. Up next, sport. Presidency NFF receives Super Falcons in Abuja. Stay with us.
You are watching ANN.
If you know it, go internet or follow for Twitter. You know it's not photo send or get it photo send. That because you the use palasa. Your phone no the answer. See me see wahala. My brother, go get smartphone yeah. Drop that palasa phone. Phone when no go for your hand yeah. Drop that palasa phone. Phone when no fit take selfie. Drop that palasa phone. No be correct phone yeah. Drop that palasa phone.
Upgrade to a smartphone today and get double data for 6 months on any MTN data bundle you buy. Simply purchase a smartphone from any store, anywhere in Nigeria, or bring your current smartphone from any network. Insert your MTN SIM card to start enjoying your double data bonus. Offer is open to all new and existing MTN subscribers. Join the largest smartphone movement today.
Make it not for your hand. That's Malasa phone.
Welcome back. This is ANN News and Sport. The Chief of Staff to President Muhammadu Buhari, Abayari, was at the head of a delegation of prominent Nigerians and top officials of the Nigeria Football Federation that received the Super Falcons on arrival in Abuja on Sunday evening. The Super Falcons edged the resilient South African Bayana side 4-3 on penalties after a scoreless 2 hours. to lift the top African Women Football Trophy 3 times in a row and 9th time overall. Kudos and congratulations to the ladies on an impressive finals. South African Football Association (SAFA) says Confederation of African Football (CAF) has asked that it seriously consider hosting the 2019 AFCON tournament. This after Cameroon was stripped of hosting rights on Friday. SAFA President Dr. Danny Jordan says the association will make the bid for hosting the tournament, but would first consult the government and make a strong business case. He says the final decision will rest with the government. Jordan lauded Banyana's silver performance at the AFCON tournament that just ended over the weekend. He said this was not by accident, but a result of proper planning by the association. The SAFA president also said his country has entered a bid for the 2023 FIFA Women's World Cup. That is any news this evening. Thank you for joining us. For details on this and other stories, visit our website, annafrica.net. Conversation continues on our social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at ANN Africa TV. I am Olajumoke Olatunji. Have a pleasant evening.